The conference hall in Geneva buzzed with the polished elegance typical of high-level diplomatic gatherings. The carpets were too soft to make a sound, the chandeliers too grand to be noticed, and the faces too composed to betray any tension. It was a summit not about conflict, but about something subtler. Human development, humanitarian cooperation, and global resilience. Some came for policy, others came for appearances. But one man stood out, simply because he wasn't trying to stand out. Captain Ibrahim Traoré arrived with the kind of calm that made others pause, without knowing why. Dressed in a modest dark suit. No flashy entourage. No rehearsed smiles. Just a quiet presence. And the posture of someone who had spent more time with people than with podiums. Some delegates glanced at him, unsure whether he was a security officer or a speaker. But those who knew him, or rather, those who had followed the stories whispered across Africa, recognized him instantly. He was the face of a new kind of leadership. Not loud, not perfect, but undeniably human. At the far end of the room stood another figure. In stark contrast, President Ilham Aliyev of Azerbaijan, stately and firm, was known for his strategic foresight and measured control over a nation balancing development, diplomacy, and geography, where Traoré was a symbol of rising leadership from the grassroots. Aliyev was a seasoned statesman, navigating complexities that few truly understood. He carried the air of someone who knew when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. They had no official meeting scheduled. Their countries were distant, their challenges seemingly unrelated. One dealt with rebuilding rural villages after years of neglect. The other managed energy corridors, delicate diplomacy, and historical tensions. Yet, both were men who bore the quiet weight of decision-making in times when every move was watched, every silence interpreted. It was during a break between panel sessions that their paths crossed literally. Captain Traoré had just stepped outside the conference hall, looking for a moment of air, when he found himself beside a row of manicured hedges that led to a small marble terrace. To his left, seated alone on a stone bench, was President Aliyev. No staff, no security in sight. Just a flask of tea resting beside him and a view of the lake. Their eyes met. There was a second, just long enough for hesitation, before Traoré nodded. A simple gesture. Polite. Respectful. Aliyev, known for his reserve, surprised even himself when he raised his hand slightly and motioned to the bench. "Please," he said, his voice steady. "Have a seat. It's quiet here." Traoré sat, not out of diplomacy, but because he sensed something human in the offer. Two men, two worlds. But for a moment, no titles. For a full minute, they said nothing. Just the distant sound of wind brushing against the lake. "I listened to your panel." Aliyev finally spoke, his eyes still on the horizon. "You didn't use notes. No slides. Just a story." Traoré smiled faintly. "Stories are easier to remember than statistics." Aliyev nodded. "But harder to control. That's why they matter." Traoré said softly, "They're alive." Aliyev didn't respond immediately. Instead, he sipped from his tea, as if weighing the layers in Traoré's words. "You spoke about a village that had no well," he said, "and a girl who walked 3 hours for water." "I did," Traoré replied. "But the story isn't about her walk. It's about why no one walked with her before. That line hung in the air. Not provocative. Not judgmental. Just piercing. Aliyev leaned forward slightly. We also have regions that feel forgotten. Different circumstances. Same ache. Perhaps. Traoré looked at him. People rarely want everything. Most of the time, they just want to be seen. The breeze picked up, scattering a few leaves onto the stone floor beneath them. A pair of aides passed by at a distance, but neither man acknowledged them. Traoré did not press for more. He didn't ask about border policy, or international alignment, or regional tension. He didn't need to. Sometimes, silence creates more space for truth than any question can. Aliyev, a man not easily moved. I found himself unsettled, not in a threatening way, but in the way one feels when an old memory resurfaces unexpectedly. He thought of the visits he'd made to remote towns, the hands he had shaken, the letters he'd received from children whose names he would never remember. And yet, one in particular came to mind now, a letter from a young boy who had asked not for toys, or books, or roads, but for a window in his school, so the sun can come in and help us see better. He'd approved that renovation the next day, but he'd never spoken about it. Until now. Do you think leadership is mostly about listening? Aliyev asked. Not looking at Traoré, but not looking away either. I think it's about choosing who you're willing to listen to. Traoré said. They stayed on that terrace for nearly an hour. No recorders. No press. No declarations. Just two men, speaking with the rare honesty that power usually does not permit. When Traoré stood to leave, Aliyev extended his hand. I hope this won't be our last conversation. Traoré shook it firmly. If it is, I hope it was enough. As the Burkinabe leader walked away, Aliyev remained seated, still watching the lake. But his mind was far from Geneva. It was somewhere quieter. Dustia. Perhaps in a place with no windows yet, but with sunlight waiting to be let in. Back inside the hall, the program resumed. Delegates returned to their roles. Microphones turned back on. Speeches were delivered. But something unspoken had already shifted. In a space where diplomacy is often about posture, one brief encounter had reminded two men, and perhaps through them, two nations, that leadership is most powerful when it chooses to listen, especially when no one is demanding it to. And though no treaty was signed that day, though no headlines were made, the seed of something quieter and deeper had been planted. Not in documents, but in conscience. The next morning, the sky over Geneva was gray, but calm. The conference resumed with its usual rhythm, moderated panels, coffee breaks, translators whispering into earpieces, and polite applause following carefully worded commitments. But for Captain Ibrahim Traoré, something had shifted from the day before. It wasn't a diplomatic breakthrough. It wasn't a handshake that made headlines. It was something far less visible, yet more profound. He had spoken to someone not as a counterpart, not as a head of state, but as a human, and more surprisingly, that someone had listened. President Ilham Aliyev, too, carried a different demeanor that day. To most observers, he remained reserved, disciplined, predictably. But those closest to him, his foreign advisor, his chief of staff, noticed that his eyes lingered longer on the humanitarian panels. His questions during private sessions were no longer about policy frameworks, but about people, How many civilians were being served in conflict-affected regions? What measures existed to protect families near borders? Were these solutions scalable? Traoré didn't seek him out again. He didn't need to. Sometimes, when two people share a moment of truth, chasing it again too soon only cheapens it. But fate or something quieter brought them together again. On the third day of the conference, it was after a panel on food insecurity. Traoré had spoken last. Not about aid shipments or economic forecasts, but about a single woman named Salamata in northern Burkina Faso, who had managed to grow an entire garden out of a dry patch of land using nothing but recycled water and leftover seeds. She didn't wait for help, he had said. She became the help. When the session ended, President Aliyev approached him in the hallway, not as a head of state demanding an audience, but as a man intrigued by a perspective he couldn't shake. She became the help? Aliyev repeated. That phrase has stayed with me. Traoré nodded. It stayed with me too. That's why I repeat it. Aliyev gestured toward a side corridor, quieter than the rest. Walk with me. They stepped into the passage. No security guards this time. Just polished floors and the soft hum of distant voices. I have something I want to share, Aliyev said, his tone lower now. Something I rarely speak about. Traoré simply walked beside him. No response needed. Just presence. Aliyev continued. Years ago, I visited a remote region near our mountain border. We were building infrastructure there. Roads, communication towers, medical outposts. Most people welcomed us. Some didn't. One morning, during an unannounced visit, I met a group of villagers. There was a boy, maybe 11 or 12, who ran up to me, tugged at my coat, and asked, Do presidents ever come to places like this? Traoré slowed his steps. Aliyev looked ahead. Remembering, I didn't know what to say. I looked down and asked him, Why do you ask? And he said, Because people here only show up when something goes wrong. Never when something is right. He let out a soft breath. That boy didn't ask for a favor. He just wanted to be noticed while things were still peaceful. Before they weren't. Traoré spoke gently. That's the heart of it, isn't it? Leadership isn't about responding to crisis. It's about noticing peace before it disappears. They reached a glass wall at the far end of the hallway. Outside, Geneva's streets glimmered under a light rain. People hurried under umbrellas. Cars crawled through narrow lanes. Life continued in quiet chaos. Aliyev turned to face him. You've seen things I haven't. Lived things I haven't. But I think we both carry the same weight, wanting to protect something we can't fully control. Traoré replied after a long pause. Yes. We all want to protect something. The difference is what we're willing to sacrifice in that process. Aliyev nodded slowly, absorbing every word. For a man used to discussions filled with conditions, clauses, and calculations, this felt like breathing different air. A few moments passed in silence. Then, unexpectedly, Aliyev asked, Can I tell you something difficult? Traoré met his eyes. Of course. There's a village in a tense zone near our border, he said carefully, that I haven't visited in over 5 years. Not because I forgot, but because I didn't know what I would say if I went. Traoré said nothing, letting the silence hold space. Aliyev's voice softened. I want to go back there. Not with cameras. Not with promises. Just to walk and see. and listen. That, Traoré said with quiet conviction, might be the most important thing you do this year. The two men stood there, side by side, gazing at a city that didn't know what was being decided in that quiet hallway. No treaties, no headlines, just a seed being planted in conscience again. The third and final time they met during the conference was unplanned. It was on the rooftop terrace during the final night's reception. Delegates mingled under warm lights. Violin music filled the background. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of finger food and crystal glasses. Aliyev found Traoré standing at the edge, looking out over the rooftops. "You're not one for small talk, are you?" Aliyev asked with a smile. Traoré chuckled. "Not unless it leads somewhere." Aliyev handed him a small envelope. "Something for you. No politics. Just something I thought you'd understand." Traoré opened the envelope. Inside was a photo. An old one. A faded image of a boy standing on a hill, arms crossed, facing the wind. "It's me," Aliyev said. Before the titles, before the weight. Just a boy who thought borders were imaginary lines and that one voice could change a room. Traoré looked at the photo, then at the man before him. "That boy is still there." Aliyev exhaled slowly. "I hope so." They stood there, not as representatives of nations, but as two men who had touched something beyond politics. As the music rose and lights shimmered across the skyline, it became clear what had formed between them was not an alliance, not a transaction, but a bridge, quiet, fragile, and real. And while the world continued to look for loud declarations and dramatic gestures, what happened in those small corners of Geneva, in the silences and side corridors, would ripple outward in ways no one could yet predict. Because sometimes, the most important conversations happen between sentences, and sometimes, the deepest shifts begin with just two people listening. A week had passed since the Geneva summit ended. Yet the echoes of certain conversations still lingered in the minds of those who had been there. Most delegates had returned to their countries, filed their reports, and resumed their routines. Media coverage summarized the event with sterile headlines: "Leaders pledge cooperation." "New frameworks proposed for humanitarian support." "Africa's voice gains ground." But what happened beyond the microphones, what wasn't recorded or televised, was what truly mattered. Especially to one man. In a quiet office nestled within the administrative heart of Baku, President Ilham Aliyev sat alone at his desk. A single lamp lit the room. The early evening light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows on the marble floor. The envelope Traoré had given back to him, containing nothing but a folded sheet of paper with 6 handwritten words, now sat at the corner of the desk. He only needs someone to look. No signature, no official stamp, just a sentence that refused to leave Aliyev's thoughts. His team had presented him with a variety of routine decisions that morning. Economic updates, scheduling matters, diplomatic correspondence, but none had felt urgent. Instead, one issue kept resurfacing in his mind: the small village near the border, the one he hadn't visited in over 5 years, the one he'd mentioned to Traoré. It wasn't a hotspot. There were no current skirmishes, no breaking news from that area. Just tension, quiet and constant. A line on the map where history had left wounds unhealed, where families tried to live normal lives with uncertainty just across the horizon. That afternoon, Aliyev made an unannounced decision. Prepare the vehicle, he told his chief aide. No official motorcade. No media. The aide blinked. Surprised. Sir, where are we? I'm going to Zaylan, he said plainly. Zaylan, a village most of his cabinet hadn't heard mentioned in years. The name itself sounded like an afterthought. 3 hours later, just before dusk, a single black SUV arrived at the edge of the village. No flags, no reporters, only the wind and the faint sounds of children playing in the distance. Aliyev stepped out alone. The villagers didn't recognize him at first. A looked different, no suit, no podium, no distance in his eyes. Just a man walking slowly through the dusty streets, past uneven brick houses, makeshift gardens, and wire fences that marked not only property lines but stories of hardship. A woman selling flatbread under a corrugated metal awning stared, hesitating. A group of children paused their soccer game and looked at the stranger curiously. Then a man, a schoolteacher, approached. Slowly, cautiously. Are you? Aliyev nodded. Yes. The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was confusion. Why would he be here? Why now? I just want to walk, Aliyev said gently. May I? The teacher gave a slow nod. And then, like a current passing through the ground, word began to spread. But there were no screams, no hysteria, just awareness. Quiet footsteps joined behind him, an old man with a cane, a young woman holding a toddler, a group of teenagers in worn sneakers. He walked to the school building. Cracked walls, a rusted flagpole. Inside, handmade posters still hung, yellowed from the sun. In one classroom, a boy sat alone, finishing his homework by the window. Aliyev stepped in. What are you working on? He asked. Geography, the boy replied without looking up. Aliyev approached the desk. What part? Mountains, rivers, borders, the boy said. Then finally looked up. His eyes widened. Are you? Yes. The boy stood quickly. We didn't know you were coming. I didn't know either, Aliyev said softly. I just wanted to see things with my own eyes. They spoke for a while. Not about politics. About weather. About books. About the boy's dream to become a doctor. But maybe I'll just fix cars, he added sheepishly. Aliyev chuckled. Both jobs require a steady hand. That night, Aliyev didn't stay in a hotel. He returned to the capital under the cover of darkness. But something had changed inside him. Not a policy shift. Not a national plan. Something simpler and far harder. The next morning, he called a private meeting with his Minister of Regional Development, the head of emergency services, and the health minister. We're reopening medical support lines in the Zaylan region, he began. I want solar-powered mobile clinics tested there first. Make sure they have clean water systems. And reassign a team of teachers to the school. No cameras. No statements. Just do it. They nodded, noting the urgency. And one more thing, he added. No military presence near the perimeter for the next 6 months. Rotate them farther back. Let the village breathe. The ministers exchanged glances. One of them finally asked, Sir, should we inform the international partners? Aliyev shook his head. Not yet. This isn't for diplomacy. It's for the people. Word of these actions reached no major headlines. There were no press briefings. no declarations of peace. But in Zeeland, things began to shift. A new well was dug. A new clinic opened. And for the first time in years, no patrols were seen walking the outer limits of the village. Children played closer to the fence. Farmers planted without fear of sudden interruption. And in the classroom, the geography books remained open, still teaching mountains and rivers, but with a new kind of hope between the lines. As for Traoré, he received no official update. No letter. No call. But a week later, a package arrived at the Burkina Faso presidential office. Inside it was a single item, a small photo. The same boy from the school, now holding a stethoscope to a plastic doll. Grinning from ear to ear. Taped to the back of the photo was a note. You were right. He only needed someone to look. Traoré read the note in silence. Then, without a word, placed it beside a folded piece of paper on his desk, the very same one he had written at the conference. Leadership, he thought, wasn't about the loudest voice. It wasn't about making noise or claiming credit. Sometimes, the most powerful decisions are the ones that happen when no one's watching, when no one asks for applause. Sometimes, the right choice is made in silence. Weeks passed, then a month, and soon, the Geneva conference faded into the background of world affairs. Other headlines emerged: elections, summits, economic forecasts. News cycles moved on, as they always do, but far from the spotlight. In places where the soil was dry and the people had long learned to live without promises, something subtle was growing. In the village of Zeeland, children no longer stopped playing when a vehicle passed. The soldiers that once patrolled the edge of the settlement had not returned. A new teacher arrived, fresh from the capital, bringing books and energy the classroom hadn't felt in years. The solar clinic had begun operations quietly, treating minor infections, distributing vitamins, and offering checkups that once required long journeys to distant cities. Nothing about the change felt historic. There were no banners, no declarations of peace, no foreign delegations visiting to verify its success. But for the people of Zeeland, the change was real, tangible, daily. And one afternoon, while tending to a modest garden she had grown behind her home, a woman named Elna whispered to her neighbor, "You know, it feels like someone is finally watching over us. Not in control, just watching, listening." Back in Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood alone at the edge of a community well in the outskirts of Ouagadougou. A group of children laughed nearby, tossing pebbles into the water. He didn't interrupt them. He simply stood still, looking into the reflection below, seeing his own face flicker between the ripples. His thoughts were not on politics or speeches. They were with a photograph still resting on his desk. The boy from Zeeland, with the plastic stethoscope and the grin too wide for the frame. Later that evening, Traoré met with a group of youth volunteers in a small, unassuming room above a local library. No press, no fanfare, just young men and women who had started organizing community gardens, tutoring programs, and water access projects across rural villages. One of the volunteers, a girl named Mariam, asked during the discussion, "Captain, how do we know what we're doing matters? There's so much we can't change." Traoré didn't respond right away. He looked at each of them, faces filled with hope but shadowed by doubt. Then, quietly, He told them a story. A man once visited a village, not because there was trouble, but because he wanted to remember what peace looked like. He didn't make a speech. He didn't announce a gift. He just walked the streets. I saw the people and listened. And from that listening, something changed. No one noticed at first. But one day, a boy in that village smiled in a way he hadn't before, because something invisible had shifted. He paused. You ask me how we know if what we're doing matters. The answer is, we don't always know. Not at once, not with certainty. But we keep doing it anyway. Because one day, a smile appears that wasn't there before. And sometimes, that's the only proof we get. The room went quiet, not because they didn't understand, but because they did. And then a hand rose in the back. Was that man you? A voice asked. Traoré smiled. No, it was someone else. But I was lucky enough to meet him. The group stayed late into the evening. And when they left, the room remained filled with something unspoken, resolve. Perhaps, or reverence. Maybe just the understanding that sometimes the smallest stories carry the largest truths. Meanwhile, in Baku, President Ilham Aliyev was reviewing a regional report. It noted increased school attendance in Zaylan, decrease in health emergencies, early signs of agricultural stability due to restructured irrigation efforts, all of it presented in charts and data points. He closed the report, then walked to his bookshelf, pulled out a single frame, and placed it on his desk. The photograph of himself as a boy, standing on a hill, the same one he had once shared with Traoré. Below it, he placed a new photo, the boy from Zaylan, the one who, without knowing it, had reminded him of who he once was. For a moment, Aliyev looked at both images, side by side. Then he whispered, to no one in particular, we forget too easily. He sat down and began to write. Not a policy, not a speech, a letter, addressed to no one. Really, perhaps to himself, perhaps to the future. We lead not by commanding, but by noticing, not by showing power, but by recognizing humanity. When we look closely, we find that most people are not asking us to fix everything. They are asking us to remember they exist. He folded the note, placed it into an envelope, and sealed it. The next day, he gave it to his assistant. If you ever meet someone who doubts that listening changes anything, he said, give them this. Far across continents, Captain Traoré visited a school in a rural village. The children had painted a mural on the outer wall, a simple scene of a tree, a well, and a figure standing quietly beside it. No name, just presence. A teacher told him, they say that's you. Traoré tilted his head. Does it look like me? The teacher smiled. It looks like someone who showed up as the sun dipped low on the horizon. Traoré turned to the children and asked a question they didn't expect. What do you want to remember? 10 years from now, one child raised her hand immediately. That people came, that someone listened, and in that moment, everything made sense. Not the politics, not the programs, but the principle, the lesson. The story of Captain Ibrahim Traoré and President Ilham Aliyev is not about two nations. It is not about policy, or power, or prestige. It is about presence. It's about what happens when leaders choose to listen with no cameras watching, when decisions are made not out of pressure, but out of conscience, when peace is pursued not as a strategy, but as a duty to the ordinary lives behind every border. This story teaches us that leadership, at its most powerful, is humble. That influence does not always roar, it often whispers. That change doesn't always arrive in headlines, but sometimes in the smallest gestures: a visit, a conversation, a smile, a returned photo. And it teaches us, above all, that no matter your title, your country, or your position, you have the power to see someone, and sometimes that is all they've ever needed.